Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Federal Program Compliance Division 2024-2025 Program Monitoring Validations Process Statewide Virtual Training. This training will be live. However, we have a couple of pre-recorded training norms that we're going to go over at this time.
Before the training begins, let's briefly go over today's session norms to ensure everyone is aware of the various features available to attendees within the Zoom webinar platform. This session is being conducted in a Zoom webinar format, meaning that you will not be able to share audio nor video with each other or with the presenter. Closed captioning in the form of a live transcript and subtitles that are automatically generated by the Zoom webinar platform will be available at today's training. To access the closed captioning features, locate the closed captioning live transcript icon on the Zoom menu bar and click on it. The menu will provide you the options to show subtitles, view the full transcript as the training takes place, and additional subtitle settings. If you would like to ask a question, you will be able to type it in the Q&A window. The Q&A window can be accessed by clicking on the icon on your Zoom menu bar. That wraps up the session norms for today's training. Enjoy the training.
All right, once again, thank you for joining us. If you could please let us know you're here by completing the presentation check-in. The link to complete the check-in has been placed in the chat. If you would please select Federal Program Compliance Division General for the event name, that would be greatly appreciated. Again, when prompted for the event name, select Federal Program Compliance Division General. Give you a few minutes to do that. Right. So again, good morning. My name is Jaime Huerta, and I am the Division Director in the Federal Program Compliance Division at the Texas Education Agency. On the screen, you can see the names of our small but mighty team. In our team, we have Didi Garcia, who's our Assistant Division Director, Lenitra Guess, who's a Program Director for the programs listed, Idalia Ibanez, also a Program Director, Nez Paniagua Jimenez, Program Director, also and Program Coordinator, Gerardo Ramirez, Program Director, Victoria Rivera, Program and Project Coordinator, and Vivian Smurl, Program Director. So that's our team. If you have any program-specific questions, you're going to want to reach out to them in case, because today we're going over pretty much just a general overview of the overall process. You can always reach us by locating the contact sheet on our website. There's also a live link in the handouts. The link to the handouts has also been shared in the chat in case you'd like to take a look at the handouts. But the live link at the bottom of the handouts, if you click on that, you could see if you have questions about a particular program, you could see which staff member can assist you with that. As always, I'll go over the legal disclaimer. The first thing is that this presentation is intended solely to provide general information and guidance, and it's based on the most current understanding of statute and applicable federal guidance. The content is subject to change as a result of any future guidance or other updates provided by federal agencies, and the presentation does not constitute legal advice, and entities are therefore advised to seek legal counsel regarding the information and guidance provided in the presentation before acting upon the information provided. So in today's training session, we hope that you will gain a better understanding of the 24-25 program monitoring validations process, key dates associated with the process, and resources that will become available to assist LEAs in preparing for participation in the process. Our approach in our division is always rooted in the following: providing an exceptional customer service experience, We constantly look at data to inform our decision-making, and also we work in a continuous improvement model process. Our division is tasked with three primary functions in addition to other duties as assigned, but the three primary functions of our division include providing technical assistance to LEAs and ESCs, providing training to LEAs and ESCs, and then the last part of our work is program compliance monitoring, and that's primarily what we're going to be discussing today. So we will start off with going over the process and the timelines. For today's topics, we're going to be looking at the feedback that we received, a little bit of information about how this process kind of evolved, the rationale, programs included in the process, LEA selection, program requirements selected, the year of documentation, the timeline, LEA notification, the different compliance statuses that will be assigned, and then documentation submission information. And then we'll end with the resources that will be available. So we want to start off with saying that some of you may have attended various feedback sessions that we had when we were looking to redesign this process in the post-pandemic environment. So we did listen to your feedback. We always take that feedback into consideration when we make final decisions, and your feedback definitely helped us inform the current process that now we will be implementing for the 24-25 school year. Additionally, during our monitoring and self-assessment process, part of that process, we decided that we needed to coordinate programmatic monitoring activities. We do a variety of programmatic monitoring. One of the activities is that the LEAs at the end of a grant year submit their ESSA consolidated compliance reports. In those compliance reports, there are some items that we call the self-check items, where LEAs self-report compliance on multiple or a variety of requirements by program. Since we don't do a thorough review of those requirements, we decided to make our monitoring process more robust and to coordinate those activities, that we would coordinate and conduct our program monitoring validations process with the compliance self-check process, in that we would move to a prior year documentation submission process where LEAs would submit documentation to show evidence of their self-reported compliance on the compliance report self-check. So again, we're going to be doing a validation of those responses in the compliance report self-check items when we do our documentation review during this program monitoring validation process. And additionally, as I mentioned, we always want to focus on continuous improvement. Our goal is to help LEAs meet those requirements with fidelity, ultimately so that the students and families that are supposed to be benefiting from the programs that we administer are doing just that. So again, we want to focus on continuous improvement based on the program compliance self-check statuses that are self-reported, program monitoring validations result status, and then inform the process through the LEA risk assessment process. The programs that were going to be part of the program monitoring validations process include Title I Part A, Title I Part C, Title II Part A, Title IV Part A, Title I Part D Subpart 2, and private nonprofit school equitable services. The review will be a consolidated review of all programs being monitored. This is different than our previous monitoring activities that were what we called the random validation process. During the random validation process in prior years, we were primarily looking at every LEA would get selected to participate for one requirement and one program. In this review, it's going to be a consolidated review. LEAs will be selected based on a 5-year rotation schedule, and each LEA will be selected to participate once every 5-year period. Now we're going to go over LEA selection. So LEAs that applied for federal funding via the 23-24 ESSA consolidated application and the 24-25 ESSA consolidated application for at least one of the following programs, which are the ones that we're going to be monitoring, those LEAs are part of the selection pool. So that's how we started to generate our list. We selected 234 LEAs that applied for funding in 23-24 and 24-25. After that, we kind of narrowed our list down based on the following information that I'll be providing. So the first thing we did was we excluded LEAs that participated in the 23-24 random validation process. So if an LEA participated in the Federal Program Compliance Division's random validation process last year in 23-24, then they were not in the selection pool to be selected for 24-25. However, they will be included in the selection pool in subsequent years. In terms of selection parameters, the LEA selected to participate will be required to submit 23-24 documentation requested for the following programs in which the LEA applied for federal funding in 23-24 and 24-25. And those are the 6 programs that I referenced at the beginning of today's training. Another thing we looked at is as I mentioned, we're coordinating our review with the program compliance self-checks. So in the ESSA Consolidated Compliance Report that was submitted in 23-24, for LEAs that reported not in compliance for at least one program item per program, will be excluded from participation for that particular program. And a little bit in the presentation, I'll go over some scenarios so that you can kind of see what this looks like for the different LEAs that have been selected. Now, we do have some program-specific exclusions, some additional exclusions, and this one includes LEAs that redirected 100% of their funds via funding transferability and or the Rural Education Achievement Program in 23-24 will not be required to submit documentation for the programs in which funds were redirected out of. This is only applicable to Title II Part A and Title IV Part A, because those are the 2 programs where it is allowable for LEAs to redirect their funds via funding transferability and or REAP. So as I mentioned, we're now going to go over some scenarios related to LEA selection and for which requirements each LEA is selected to participate and submit documentation for. So in this particular scenario, an LEA was selected, and in 23-24, they applied for funding for all 6 of the different programs we'll be reviewing during the 24-25 program monitoring validations process. So that's what the yes indicates, that they did apply for funding. In 24-25, the LEA applied for funding for all programs as well. So then the next thing we look at is the compliance self-check. This LEA self-reported in compliance for all program requirements for all the programs that are listed here. And therefore, this LEA, if they're selected, since they were selected to participate in this process, they'll be required to submit 23-24 documentation for one requirement selected by TEA for each program. So again, worst case scenario is this one, where an LEA meets all the requirements to be selected to participate for all 6 programs. The LEA would be required to submit documentation, again, for only one requirement that we have selected for the LEA for each of the programs listed here. So that's one scenario. Now we're going to add a couple of no's into the mix here. So this is a different LEA that was selected. And in 23-24, they did not apply for migrant Title I Part C funding, and they did not apply to provide full, or they're not providing equitable services under PMP or private nonprofit school equitable services. In 24-25, we are not looking whether they applied for migrant because they're already considered, they're not going to be required to submit documentation because they didn't apply in 23-24. So we don't even look whether they applied in 24-25. For Title II Part A, they did not apply for 24-25. And then for PMP, we also do not look at it because they're already, they won't be required to participate because they did not apply in 23-24. For compliance self-check, they reported in compliance for all Title I requirements. We're not looking at Title I-C again because they did not apply in 23-24. Title I Part D, they reported in compliance for all compliance self-check items. For Title II, we're not looking at that because they did not apply in 24-25. And Title IV Part A, they reported not in compliance for at least one program requirement. And for PMP, again, we're not looking at that because they did not apply in 23-24. So this LEA, although they applied for 4 programs in 23-24, but because they did not apply for one in 24-25, and because they had not in compliance for one in 23-24, ultimately this LEA that's been selected will only be required to submit documentation for Title I Part A and Title I Part D. So now moving on to our last and final scenario related to LEA selection. So in this one, we're going to kind of throw in some REAP and funding transferability where this LEA redirected some of their funds, or 100% of their funds. So in 23-24, this LEA applied for all programs. However, for Title II Part A, they redirected 100% of their funds via REAP or funding transferability. In 24-25, they applied for Title I-A, Title I-C, Title I-D. We're not looking at whether they applied for Title II Part A because they reaped 100% in 23-24, so they're already not going to be required to submit for that program. For Title IV Part A, they reaped 100% in 24-25. However, they did apply in 23-24. And for PMP, they applied or they provided equitable services through ESSA in the 24-25 year. Now we're going to look at compliance self-check responses. For Title I Part A, they reported in compliance for all their program requirements. Title I Part C, they reported not in compliance for at least one program requirement. For Title I Part D, they reported in compliance for all program requirements. For Title II Part A, we're not going to be looking at that because they transferred 100% of their funds out of Title II in 23-24. Now for Title IV, we are going to be looking at their compliance status because although they reaped 100% of their funds in 24-25, they still operated a Title IV program in 23-24. So again, they would still be included in the process. And then for PMP, they reported in compliance for all their self-check items. So for this LEA, they'll be required to submit documentation for Title I Part A, Title I Part D, Title IV Part A, and PMP. And again, the reason for Title IV Part A is because they operated a program in 23-24, even though they reaped in 24-25, and thus we're still going to be looking at that documentation from the year of the program that they implemented in 23-24. So now we're going to be moving on to numbers of the number of LEAs. I know I previously mentioned the number 234, but that's the number of LEAs that have been selected to participate statewide. The program participation is technically what we've done is because we're going to be doing a 5-year rotation schedule, we divided the number of we looked at the historical data for LEAs applying for the multiple programs that we're monitoring, and we took 20%. We tried to stay within, give or take 20% of the total number of LEAs so that every year we could look at 20%, which again, in 5 years, that would equal to 100%. So these are the numbers based on that 20%, again, give or take, plus or minus. So for Title I Part A, we had 234 LEAs that were selected. So every single LEA that's been selected for this year's process are going to be required to submit documentation for Title I Part A. Of those 234, we have 68 for Title I Part C, 9 for Title I Part D Subpart 2, 123 for Title II Part A, 101 for Title IV Part A, and 29 for private school equitable services. So that is, again, the number that we will be reviewing documentation for by program. Here you can see the number of LEAs that we've also selected by region. And again, we selected the numbers by region based on a 20% count. So for example, if you look at the list, we go down to Region 10 that has 22 LEAs selected. The reason that they have the most is because they have the most LEAs in their particular region. So basically what we did, again, we tried to how do I say it? Spread out so that in a given year, we could equitably have ESC supporting an equitable amount of LEAs based on our 5-year rotation schedule. So for 24-25 for this process, we're now going to look at the number of programs selected per LEA and the number of LEAs. So for one program, 84 LEAs have been selected to only submit documentation for one program, again, based on the scenarios that we talked about. So 84 LEAs, which is 36% of the LEAs selected to participate, will only submit documentation we're required to submit documentation for only one program. And for that program, it's basically going to be Title I Part A, because as I mentioned, all 234 LEAs are participating in the Title I Part A monitoring. There are 35 LEAs that are going to have to submit documentation for 2 programs. 66 LEAs for 3 programs, 34 LEAs for 4 programs, 13 LEAs for 5 programs, and 2 LEAs for 6 programs. So now we're at a point for questions. So I'm going to be looking at the Q&A to try to answer any questions that may be coming in. So in scenario 2, why is T2A not included? Because no 24-25 funding, but in scenario 3, Title IV is included even though the LEA reaped in 24-25. So the difference is that they did not apply. And so if they did not apply in 24-25, our selection criteria was that they apply in both years. So applying is one thing, redirecting is a different thing. So that's the difference, is that when an LEA did not apply for one of the 2 years, they weren't required to submit. If they reaped in 24-25 but ran a program in 23-24, they are still going to need to submit documentation. There's a question on when will we be notified. I'll be going through the timeline a bit later, but it is November 13th. And there was 2 questions about that. So is PMP only for LEAs that have PMP within their district? Yes. So if you are providing private nonprofit equitable services as per your ESSA consolidated applications, that's how we determined whether you would be required to participate in the PMP documentation submission process. And again, it's if you're providing PMP services. I know there's a question about outside LEA boundaries. That is allowable for certain programs. And again, if you answered yes on your application, then you would have been selected to participate for PMP. If selected, will the LEA have to submit for 23-24 and 24-25? We'll get to that in a little bit, but it is only prior year documentation. We're only reviewing documentation from the 23-24 school year. There's a question that an LEA participated in the Title I Part C validation last year. Are we excluded for all validations for this year or just Title 1C? So because it's a consolidated review, if you participated in any of the validations administered by our division last year, you are excluded this year from all programs. You'll be placed back in the pool for year 2, 3, 4, and 5, or 5. And I think I answered the question. Essentially, if you are in compliance, plan to provide documentation, correct? Yeah, that is correct. If you reported that you're in compliance with the requirements, then, but again, it's not all requirements. It's one that we have selected that you would be providing that documentation for. And we'll go over the actual requirements that have been selected in a bit. Okay, I have one more question and then we're going to move on. Oh, I already answered the question about if you were selected last year for validation for one program. Yeah, you're not going to be selected at all for this year. So keep the questions coming and we'll have another opportunity where I'll get to a next set of questions. So now we're going to talk about the program requirements selected. So program requirements that we've selected come from the program-specific and ESSA provisions and assurances for the 23-24 ESSA Consolidated Federal Grant Application. So when your district or charter system applies for or decides that they're going to apply for federal funding for ESSA programs, they are required to first start the process by submitting the SC 5003. It's a special collection in our eGrants online system for grants management. And they submit this special collection, which is called the Formula Grants Consolidated Schedule. Basically, what a district is doing when their superintendent or their certifying official submits this form in our system, they are certifying that they accept and are in compliance with all the applicable guidelines and requirements. And so again, here's ESSA. And so again, these are not requirements that we're just selecting that LEAs aren't aware of. These are requirements that are actually in this document. This is your fine print of accepting ESSA funds. And so all the requirements that we've selected for you to submit documentation for can be found in this particular document. So again, we wanted to stress that these are not requirements that LEAs should not be aware of, because again, these are requirements that are documented in this document. And when you apply for that funding, you're certifying that you are in agreement with implementing the requirements. As I mentioned, aside from the requirements, we're also going to be coordinating with what the responses were in the ESSA Consolidated Compliance Report. So we're going to be taking a look at all these compliance reports that I've highlighted to determine whether that's where we look to see whether you provided an in compliance status or not in compliance status. So again, the PR 1000 is for Title I Part A, PR 1200 Title I Part C, PR 2000 Title I Part D, PR 3000 Title II Part A, PR 3107 the Title IV Part A report, and then the PR 3099 the PMP report. So again, that's where we're going to be looking, or that's where we looked to see whether you reported in compliance or not in compliance. And again, we're looking at the 23-24 year. So the requirements that we've selected per program, you can see them here. For Title I Part A, we are looking at 5 requirements statewide. However, as I mentioned earlier, your LEA will only be selected to submit documentation for 1 requirement for each program that you've been selected or you're required to participate in. For Title I Part C, we're looking at 3 statewide. For Title II Part A, we're looking at 4 requirements. Title IV Part A, 3 requirements. Title I Part D, Subpart 2, 2 requirements. And private school equitable services, 4 statewide requirements. Now, I do want to mention that the number of requirements selected may vary from year to year within the 5-year monitoring cycle. And again, that's due in part to the finding we received for subrecipient monitoring, where we know that for Title I Part A, there aren't only 5 requirements out there. There's multiple requirements. I would say over 100 requirements. So we may be increasing the number in some programs, And then as we get to the next slide, where we're actually talking about the requirements, some of these requirements may not be selected in subsequent years. They may be new requirements. So again, these are the requirements for 24-25. For Title I, Part A, we're looking at campus allocations, parent and family engagement policies for the LEA and one selected campus. We're looking at the LEA Title I, Part A program plan descriptions that would be included in your district improvement plan. We're looking at the school-wide program plan stakeholders for one school-wide campus, and those would be included in your campus improvement plan. And then the targeted assistance program student eligibility criteria for one selected targeted assistance campus. For Title I, Part C, we're looking at identification and recruitment, interstate, intrastate coordination, transfer of student records, use of M6 and data quality, and priority for service. So as you note on the Title I, Part A list, there's campus information. That is the only program that has, for the most part, the programs we're validating that has campuses attached to the validation. When there's a campus attached, you will be advised that which campus has been selected that you would submit the documentation for. For all the other programs, Title I, Part C, Title II, Part A, Title IV, Part A, there aren't campuses associated with that. So you would just be submitting documentation for at the LEA level. For Title I, Part D, Subpart 2, there's the formal agreement and program evaluation. Title II, Part A, alignment with challenging state academic standards, meaningful consultation of stakeholders, prioritization of funds, and LEA use of funds for evidence-based activities. Title IV, Part A, consultation, evaluation of program effectiveness, and description of programs and activities. For private nonprofit equitable services administration amounts, we also have, so it's LEA documented equitable services administrations amounts, timely and meaningful consultation meetings, LEA documented PMP equitable services amounts, and LEA inventory control of PMP purchases for equitable services. So those are the program requirements that we have selected. Again, they're statewide. Each LEA will only be required to submit documentation for one that we have selected for each LEA. So again, the documentation requested for review by TEA will be prior year documentation. So when you receive your notice, the documentation you'll be required to submit is for 23-24. TEA will also review the 23-24 LEA compliance report self-check, as I previously referenced, to confirm the compliance status that was reported via the documentation submission. And of course, the rationale for this is to streamline program monitoring in a given year and to coordinate our monitoring of the compliance report self-check items with our program monitoring validations process. So one thing we want to note here is that documenting overall compliance for a program requirement may require several forms of documentation to be maintained locally and available upon request by TEA and/or an auditor. To ensure overall compliance with program requirements, LEA should refer to the program guide and/or other program-related resources that reference the multiple forms of documentation required to be maintained locally. So all that to say that sometimes, in some cases, the documentation that we're requesting for submission during our process may not include all forms of documentation that are required to be maintained locally. So it's important that we want you to understand that we may be only asking for one piece of documentation, but you should have multiple pieces of documentation available to document compliance with that particular requirement. Okay, so we're at another point for some questions. So there's a question, will districts indicating non-compliance on any of the self-check questions in 24-25 then be excluded from the validation in 25-26? So yes, we'll use a similar methodology for determining which LEAs are selected. And so yes, What we don't want to happen is when you report not in compliance, you get points added to your risk assessment. So if you're already self-reporting that you're not in compliance, then we don't want you to participate in this process, because then if you are not in, you already self-reported that you're not in compliance, and then we would review your documentation, then you would get points added because you didn't meet compliance requirements. So we don't feel that that would be equitable or fair for an LEA. And so therefore, that's why we decided that you would be excluded for that particular program if you reported not in compliance for at least one item. If USDE audited us for TEA, would we still be possibly selected? If you were part of the LEA selected to be part of the USDE monitoring visit, you will still be part of our process, because again, LEAs that are visited by USDE on behalf of TEA, technically you're not participating in an audit, you're providing information to USDE. And ultimately it's TEA that gets the finding or recommendations. So yeah, so you would still be part of the process. It's only if you participated in our random validation process in 23-24, then you would be excluded for this year. There's a request to show a slide. I'll get to that in just a little bit. Let's see. If an LEA is found as needing improvement for 23-24, will they need to refund money to the state for that program? So our reviews are programmatic, and 99.9% of the time we provide you with the opportunity to self-correct. And so again, I won't say that we'll never ask for refund of money, but technically, unless you are not compliant after you're referred for the non-compliant resolution process, at that time, maybe that could be the case. But initially, for our programmatic monitoring, that is not usually the case. But again, if there's something that is found that is really egregious, and there's a major issue, then at that time, it wouldn't be our decision, but we would refer it to the Federal Fiscal Monitoring Division, where they do the fiscal reviews and fiscal audits, and they would determine how to best move forward with that issue. Do you anticipate running through all the provisions and assurances in the 5-year validation process? We're not sure. There are some requirements we may be able to, but others we may not. So I would say it depends. Will this recording be made available? Yes, the recording and the slides. Well, the slides are already available. The recording will become available, and I'll show you towards the end of today's session where you can access that resource. If we are part of an SSA for a program, we'll be required to submit documentation for that program. So if you are a member district in a shared services arrangement, your LEA is still in the selection pool. So whether you applied as an independent project or a member of an SSA or shared services arrangement, you're still in our pool. So you would still be required to submit documentation for that program or other programs. There's a question. We are a Title I district. We have 2 campuses. If selected, will you be looking at a campus or the district? So for Title I Part A purposes, there's some requirements that that include a campus, and there's some that do not. Like, for example, campus allocations. If you are selected for campus allocations, that's a district level requirement. So we would not ask you to submit any documentation for a particular campus, because campus allocations would be for all your Title I campuses, your documentation for that particular requirement. For all other programs, there are no campus-specific requirements. There's a question of the number of requirements selected may vary from year to year. Does this include the number that will be validated per LEA selected? Yeah, it's possible that in future years, an LEA may have an item, a requirement that involves multiple requirements. For example, we already kind of have one like that for the written parent and family engagement policy. we're asking for the LEA policy as well as for one campus policy. So there may be some instances where multiple requirements that are similar in nature, there would be multiple pieces of documentation that are requested per program. If a district filed a not in compliance for 23-24 for Title I Part A, they will be exempt from the validation for Title I Part A in 24-25. The district will, for other programs, get validated. Just want to confirm. That is correct. If you made the list or the first cut of the list or the last actually cut or draft of the list, and if you self-reported not in compliance for Title I Part A, but you have other programs that you meet the requirements to participate in, then for Title I Part A, you will be excluded from participation, but you would still participate for the other programs where you met the requirements. Now, if you reported not in compliance across the board, all programs, then you probably were dropped off the list for this year and you'll be included in multiple years. But once you're done participating in the 5-year cycle, whether you reported not in compliance or in compliance, you're already out of the selection pool and you'll be included in the next 5-year cycle. There's a question about when we will be notified. I'll be going over the timeline in a little bit, but the date is November 13th. And then there's an information about when to submit information. Again, I'll go over the timeline in just a little bit. And then somebody wanted me to show a slide, the chart of the ESCs, of the number by ESC. So I can do that right quick. So here's a slide with the number of LEAs by program and by ESC. So again, total number of LEAs selected by ESC region, and then the number by program. So for example, here for Region 1, 9 LEAs were selected that are in Region 1. Of those 9, there's 9 Title I districts. 6 of those 9 are Title I-C districts. 1 is a Title I-D. 6 are Title II Part A. 4 are Title IV Part A, and 1 is PMP. And then one last question before we move on. If you were selected and then put on a corrective action plan, will you then submit for 24-25? So we'll go over that process in a little bit of the statuses that are assigned. And so I'll address that question in a little bit. Okay, we're going to move on. Let me just scroll down to the next slide. Okay, now we're getting to the timeline. There's lots of questions about the timeline. So our timeline is that, as I mentioned before, that we will be notifying LEAs on November 13th if they've been selected to participate. Between November 13th and December 13th, ESCs or Education Service Centers will offer and provide any technical assistance you may need to submit your documentation. And the documentation will be due by December 13th. We'll go over kind of how the notification process will happen and how documentation submission will happen. By February 28th, we will complete our documentation review. We generally meet and will meet with ESCs to discuss our preliminary results in March. And then official notification of results will occur on April 11th. So for LEA notification of a selection, there is going to be an email that's going to be sent to all the LEA contacts for a district or charter system that have access to the Department of Grant Compliance and Administration Work App System, the Smartsheet Work App System. So again, all LEA contacts will receive an auto-generated email on November 13th that provides general information that the LEA has been selected, along with instructions on how to download the official notification letter. The official notification letter is the most important piece of this notification because in the letter, it's going to have all the information related to which programs you're required to participate and which requirement. And if you're a Title I district, if you've been selected for a campus requirement, then you'll be provided with the campus information for that particular campus. So again, it's very important that once you get that email, you log into the work app system, and I'm going to demonstrate where that is and how to do that in just a little bit, so that you can download the actual letter that has all the important information. We will also be sending out a statewide news bulletin after LEAs have been notified, advising the field that we've made that selection emails have gone out, and that the resources have been posted, in case anybody needs to go and check with their superintendent or federal programs directors or assistant superintendents that may have received the notification. We will also be posting a list of all the LEAs that were selected on our program monitoring validations webpage. So again, the list will include all the LEAs that were selected and for which programs are required to participate. And that will probably occur the next day, November 14th. So this is a screenshot of the letter, and I'll go into more detail in a little bit on the second page. But the first page just has general information about the process, links to resources. And the second page, again, as I mentioned, is very important because this is like the top half of the letter. This is a screenshot of the top half of what that letter will be, page 2, where it's going to show the 6 different programs that are being reviewed in the first column. Here we only see 3 because I wanted to zoom in to the at least half of the document so you could kind of see what it looked like. The next column is participation. If it states required to participate, then you're going to be required to submit documentation for that program. For this example, for Title I Part A, the LEA is required to participate. Title I Part C, required to participate. Title I Part D, not applicable. So there, you wouldn't be required, if it says not applicable, you wouldn't be required to submit any documentation for that particular program. In the next column is the program requirement and the ESSA citation for which you've been selected to submit documentation for. So in this case, for Title I Part A, this LEA has been selected to participate in the written parent and family engagement policies validation. And then you could see where in the section of the law where these requirements are. And then at the very under each requirement, we're including a link to the program-specific guidance document that has all the information related to the documentation that's being requested. For Title I Part C, required to participate, the requirement is for this LEA is interstate, intrastate coordination, transfer of student records, use of M6, and data quality. And then again, you have the link to the guidance document for that particular requirement. Now, in the last column, as I previously referenced, for campus, there's only certain Title I requirements that require a campus to have been selected. And so in this box, right under campus name on the Title I row, Title I Part A row in the table, that's where you're going to have the campus ID number and the name of the campus that's been selected for the documentation submission process. For all other programs, it's going to say not applicable. An important note that's at the very bottom of the letter with the asterisk is that the way the system has generated these letters, it does not allow you to click on the link within the table for each resource document. So what we're asking is that you copy and paste the link into your web browser to be able to access the guidance document rather than clicking on the link, because the way this operates is that it reads the link as only a one-line link. So if you click on this link, it's going to take you to a web page or your web browser, and the link is going to end here at this little M, and it doesn't include the rest of the link, and therefore you're going to get to a page that says page not found. So again, we're asking that you copy and paste this link into your web browser to access that resource. So the LEA notification of selection letter is going to be accessed via the Federal Program Compliance Division Program Monitoring Validations Work App System. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the slides off the screen and I'm going to actually demonstrate what it looks like in our work app system to get to the letter and how to download it and how to access the system as it relates to the letter. So give me a few moments here so I can stop sharing and reshare my screen. Okay. So the LEA notification letter, if you're familiar with the work app system, you could see the window here. When you go into the work app system, you have all these work app tiles, right? That you have access to. So the work app tile we're going to be working in for this particular activity is a program monitoring validations. So you would click on that tile and it would take you to the validations work app. Now, right now, you can probably see these two links here on the left-hand side, but it's going to say there's nothing to show because we haven't made it available until November 13th. But for demonstration purposes, I have a fake LEA here, not a fictitious LEA. And so this is what the work app would look like. It looks like for you at the LEA level. So the first link at the very top is going to say 2024-2025 LEA notification of selection letter. You click on that link and then you'll see your ESC region and your CDN and LEA name right here. You click on that and it's automatically going to open this details attachments tab and your notification letter will be right there. So you click on it and it's going to download for you. And then you'll be able to access the letter. You can download the letter, save it, email it to whoever needs it. And then it's going to stay there historically. So that's how you download the letter. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see real quick, so that you can see the letter actually in full size. So again, this is what the letter is going to look like. Here it's Matt Lashley ISD, and because I don't have a superintendent name or address, it says no match, but it'll have your superintendent's name and address. As I mentioned, there's general information about the process. There's some links to access the resources. And then again, as I mentioned, the second page is really important. So Matt Lashley ISD is required to participate in Title 1A, Title 1C, Title 2A, and PMP. Again, it shows the requirement, the link to the guidance document that you would need to copy and paste in your web browser. For Title 1A, there's an elementary campus listed here, but you could see it's going to have all the information that's needed along with the date that the documentation is due. So again, this is just the notification letter. Okay, so that's how you access the notification letter. That's what it's going to look like. And again, that's how you're going to find it in the work app system. So I did include in the slide deck step-by-step instructions with screenshots on how to get into the work app and download the letter. So I kind of fast forward past that since I kind of showed you online on the screen how to access it. So we're going to start with the questions now, get back to the questions. So in future years, will an LEA be validated for more than one requirement for any program? And I mentioned that it is possible previously. It's possible that there could be multiple requirements. Again, it's based on our response to the U.S. Department of Education and seeing what they advise us and what corrective action they may require. And so that is a possibility. I don't want to say that that's not a possibility. Risk assessment points, there's a question, are there equivalent points given if an LEA reports noncompliance in the compliance report and improvement needed through the validation process? So, so again, if an LEA reported not in compliance, we're not going to select you because, again, you've already self-reported and provided a plan for how to come into compliance in the next year. So you would not be part of our process. So therefore, you wouldn't get any risk assessment points for that particular program under our validation process. There's a question about the PFE policy. Yeah, so for the PFE policy for Title I, Part A, you are required to submit your LEA policy and the campus policy for that campus that's listed in the last column of the letter. There's a question, will the resources linked in the notification letter be available for all LEAs as we self-monitor our compliance and documentation procedures? Yes, all those resources will be available on our online page that I'll show you in just a bit. There's a question can you possibly be selected for validation more than once within the 5-year cycle? So the answer is no. Once you participated in the 5-year cycle, that is your last time until the next 5-year cycle comes. Now, I will say, again, this is only for programs administered in our division. There are other programs in other divisions that conduct their own monitoring processes, and they may not be following a 5-year cycle the way we are. So it is possible that you would be selected to participate in our review, but also be selected, for example, if Title III is doing something or McKinney-Vento is doing something, because those are programs that are administered outside our division and they have their own subrecipient monitoring processes. Are we able to see who is selected before they are notified at the ESC level? The answer is no. When LEAs are selected, when LEAs are notified, that is the same time that ESCs are notified of LEA selection. Okay, so I don't see any other questions. If you are putting questions in the chat, please put them in the Q&A feature. And so again, so that we can answer your questions. Okay, we're going to move on. We'll have time to answer some more questions in a bit. So now the review of documentation compliance status assigned. So once you submit your documentation, TEA is going to conduct a review of the documentation. Our program directors are going to be reviewing them. They do, if there's an issue with documentation, we do a second level supervisor review as well. And ultimately, a decision is made on the compliance status in collaboration with supervisors and staff that are reviewing the documentation. There will be either the LEA will meet the requirement, you'll get a met requirement status, which means your review will be closed out upon notification of results. Then we added a new compliance status, which is kind of middle of the road based on your feedback. Again, we value your feedback. A lot of you, we've got a lot of comments when we did our proposed redesign process that mentioned that it felt very punitive for improvement needed, where we only had met requirement and improvement needed was automatic referral to the TEA compliance officer to engage in the non-compliance resolution process and points added to risk assessment. So we added a middle of the road status, which is approaching compliance. In that case, if your LEA receives an approaching compliance status, then once you're notified, you'll be required to respond within 20 calendar days with a plan for establishing compliance. We will review that plan and approve it. And after review and approval, then the review will be closed out. But again, these are for different requirements where maybe you didn't meet all the requirements, but you got really close. The majority of the in the documentation piece, you met the fidelity of implementation of the requirement at an acceptable level, but there's still improvement and some improvement that's needed, but you didn't miss the mark altogether. So that's approaching compliance. Now, if the program director and their supervisor determines that the documentation you submitted is not enough to establish compliance, then you would be receiving an improvement needed status. So this is where also things have changed from prior years. In prior years, if you had an improvement needed status, you were given the opportunity to resubmit documentation in the next year. So this year, we are going back to, instead of the resubmission process, if you receive an improvement needed status, your LEA is going to be referred to the TEA compliance officer to engage in the non-compliance resolution process, and points would be added to your LEA's risk assessment. So now that I talked about the status will be communicated. The final compliance status will be communicated when we notify you of results. And again, on the timeline, that's April 11th. For notification of results, it's very similar to notification of being selected. Your LEA contacts in the work app system are going to receive an auto-generated email advising them that the results are available. And the official results will be available in an official notification of results letter that'll be posted in the work app system. So again, that's how we're going to be communicating the results. So time for more questions. Let's see what we got. So there's somebody says they logged into Smartsheet. When they clicked on program monitoring, it says you're not shared to this view. Does that mean that I won't have access if we receive a letter? So yeah, if you're not shared to that view, more than likely it's because maybe you have not, your LEA is not listed on any of those yet. But if your LEA is selected, then you would have access to it. Can we get this live presentation recording? Yes, the recording will be posted, and I'll show you where it's going to be posted later in the presentation. And I'm getting a lot of repeat questions about participation. So if you participated in random validation for any program in 23-24, any program administered within our division, then you will not be selected this year. You'll be put in the LEA selection pool for subsequent years. There are some program-specific questions, and those I'd appreciate if you could just reach out to our program directors for that particular program. So there's a question on program evaluations. Please reach out to the program director. So there's a question, if you receive approaching compliance, will points be added to the risk assessment? No, because we are going to be doing a review of what your plan is and approving that. And the review will be closed out after that. So for met requirement, approaching compliance, no points will be added, or you won't be referred to the compliance officer for points for the risk assessment. If the LEA is found non-compliant for a program, will we be required to attend ESC or TEA training to work on compliance for the next year? So again, if you have an improvement needed status, it would be based on what that non-compliance resolution process is. And again, that's administered outside of our division in the department office. So you would need to engage in whatever that non-compliance resolution process is that would be communicated to your district. And again, points will not be added if you receive an approaching compliance status to the risk assessment. There's a question about how do we know if a program if a district participated in program validation during the 5-year timeline or in previous years. So you can see on in the work app on the left-hand column, there's last year's validation is available there. You can click on that, and if your LEA name is there, then you did participate. We did have a list posted for last year, but we've revamped our validations webpage, and I don't believe that's available anymore. And LEAs will be advised on a year-to-year basis. So we're not putting out a 5-year list this year. We're just putting out the list for those that have been selected for this year. Next year, we put out a list those selected for next year, and so on and so forth. The LEA risk assessment, there's an actual website for that. If somebody on the staff could find the risk assessment website and drop it in the chat, because that's administered in our department office. And I wouldn't be able to provide any kind of guidance on what the risk assessment entails. It's pretty complex, and there's multiple risk assessment criteria and indicators. All right, so it's time for a break. So we've been on for about an hour and a half now. Actually, yeah, no, about an hour. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. So we will be back at 10:40. All right, welcome back from the break. So now we're going to be going over the documentation submission instructions. So preparing documents for uploading is going to be a two-step process. So the first step is to gather and assemble the documentation into one PDF file. And then the other one is to log in to the FPC Program Monitoring Validations Work App system to complete the details form and upload the documentation PDF file. So in terms of gathering and assembling the documentation, you're going to want to use the requested documentation section of the program-specific guidance document to gather and organize the documentation requested. So again, I'll be going over the resource, the guidance document resource a little bit later, but this is going to be the most important piece of that guidance document because this is going to tell you what is required to be uploaded for review. So we're going to look at a sample here for Title I Part C. So this is an example of Title I Part C for the identification and recruitment requirement. So you can see here that there's 3 different pieces of documentation that'll be required to be uploaded: recruiter logs, reviewer logs, and IDNR action plan. You'll see that the year of documentation requested is 23-24, and then there's a description of the acceptable documentation that needs to be uploaded. So you're going to need to collect all this documentation and then put it into one PDF file to be uploaded in our work app system. And we'll go over what that's going to look like in a bit. So you would assemble the documentation in the order that it is requested. For example, 1.1, if there's 1 or 2 pages, then you get 1.2, 1 or 2, 3, 4 pages, and then 1.3, and so on and so forth. Then you would number the pages of the documentation file consecutively, kind of like this. If you have different orientation of the documentation that's being submitted, again, it doesn't matter as long as it's all in one PDF file and you have numbered those pages, because when you submit the documentation, we're going to ask you where is in the documentation, where can we find item 1.1 on what page or pages? And you will let us know which pages that we would look at to determine whether you were in compliance with, and you had the documentation that was needed to show evidence of compliance for that particular requirement. So basically, here you'll see again the different documentation. The other thing we ask that you do is to use the item number to mark the location on the page. So if it's item 1.1, if we look at the example that I had previously shared, if they're reviewer logs, then you would label your documentation 1.1 in addition to the pages on the right-hand corner. And so here's where if you'd have multiple requirements, you would number them differently. So each documentation requested item number should be marked on the appropriate page of the documentation file being submitted for review. So again, this helps the reviewer identify exactly where the documentation are. This is extremely important, especially if we're requesting multiple forms of documentation. It's really important to show us exactly where the requirement or the evidence of compliance is located within the file that you submitted for our review. Please do not include unnecessary pages. It's important that you only include the relevant pages of the documents that are being requested, because all documentation submitted must be reviewed in its entirety. And if you submit more than what we need, and we determine that there are unanticipated areas of noncompliance, your LEA can be referred to the appropriate division for further review. So one example of items sometimes that we get where it's a lot of information and it's not everything is used to establish that compliance, is usually when we have a requirement that we're requesting the relevant pages of a district improvement plan. When we say relevant pages, that means get only the pages that refer to that particular requirement where you're trying to show evidence of compliance. Maybe the cover page of the district improvement plan that has the year on it, and then the appropriate pages out of the plan that establish compliance for that particular requirement. Please do not send us the whole district improvement plan, because in that case, we'd be required to review the whole plan. And again, if we review the whole plan, there may be other potential areas of non-compliance that we may have picked up in that review. And again, it could mean that you would be referred to another division for further review. So again, it's very important that you only include pages that are necessary and relevant to the review that we are conducting. All that to say that there is a documentation file size also. So there is a 30 megabyte limit of for a file to be uploaded. There's an optimized feature sometimes that you can use to reduce the size of your file. So you may want to try that if you get an alert that the file you're trying to upload is too big. You want to ensure that all pages are actually needed once you get that limit note. And then last resort, you can split the file and upload multiple PDF files. But again, we prefer that it be only one file so that we can look at that appropriate file. So those are the instructions for gathering and assembling the documentation into one file. We are going to be asking that you gather your documentation by program. So for each program, you're going to have a place to upload the documentation that is program specific. So what I just referenced is by program. So one PDF file for Title I Part A, if you're required to participate in that one file for Title I Part C, one file for Title I Part D, and so on and so forth. The next step is logging into our validations work app system to complete the details form and upload the documentation PDF file. So again, we'll be going into the program monitoring validations work app to upload your documentation. So I'm going to demonstrate again on screen using the actual screen of the work app to kind of show you how that works. So I'm going to stop sharing here and I'm going to share the work app screen again. Okay, so as you can see the work app here. So earlier we went over the notification selection letter, right? LEA notification of selection letter. This time we are going to be looking at the place where you would actually upload your documentation. So that's going to be the second link here, the 2425 program monitoring validations link. And again, it's not accessible to you yet. So if you're having issues not identifying that work app tile, you can't see it, it's not open yet. So it's possible that if your LEA is not listed in any of these at the moment, because again, you don't have access to, we haven't provided access to it to any LEAs yet. So that's why you may not have the work app tile. If you didn't participate in a previous validation, you probably don't have the tile accessible because you're not in the contacts for this particular tile. On November 13th, if you've been selected, then it would definitely appear and you would have this information. So if you look at the screen here, I clicked on 2425 program monitoring validations, and you're going to see that there's 4 different lines here. That's one line for each program your LEA was selected to participate. So for example, this is Matt Lashley ISD. Again, it's a fictitious district. They're in region 21. We don't have 21 regions, but for this purpose, we do. And so they were selected to participate in Title I, Title I, Title 1A, Title 1C, Title 2A, and PMP. You'll see the region. You'll see your LEA name and CDN. You'll see the list of LEA contacts. Those are all the individuals within your district that have access to this system. You'll see a campus number and campus name if your requirement requires submission of campus documentation only for Title 1A. As you can see here, the others say not applicable. Then you're going to see the LEA stage, which is initial submission. This will be for everyone right now. If during the review, the reviewer needs to request either clarifying information or has questions, then you may see a different stage that says additional documentation request. In that case, if you're requested to submit additional documentation or there's a issue with the file you submitted, you would get an email advising you that there's questions about your documentation or information is missing. Again, you would be receiving an email, and then you would have a different line that says additional submission, additional documentation submission. But to start off, everybody just has initial submission. The next column, and again, you could scroll down here at the bottom. The next column will have the requirement and SS citation. So again, you'll be able to see all the requirements that your LEA has been selected to submit documentation for. The next column will show your submission status. It is automatically going to default. Everybody's going to start with submission pending, not started. And then data collection status is a new column that we're going to be adding to all our work app projects, so that when it's open, you know that you can still edit information. And when it says closed, that means that it's been closed for archiving purposes, and you can still see what you submitted, but you're not able to make any changes. So this is a new feature that we'll be adding to all our projects that we currently have in the work app system. So that's what you're going to see at first glance here. If you end up only seeing LEA contacts like that in a row, and you're trying, and you can't see the rest of them, you can toggle and expand the view of these columns, or you can select this feature here, which is a wrap text feature, and it'll wrap the text for those columns that have multiple lines of text that are not visible on the screen. So again, that's just for those purposes. Now, for uploading documentation for each program that you've been selected to participate in, you're going to select the actual line that's going to be highlighted in a light blue color. And then the details form is going to open. On the details form, we have the data tab and we have the attachments tab. You will start with the data tab. There's going to be some items that are pre-populated that are read-only. You cannot change these, right? So we'll start with Title I, Part A is the program for this requirement, the region, your LEA name and county district number, the LEA stage, the requirement. Because this requirement also has a campus, you'll see the campus information, and then you'll see each of the requested documentation. So for this one, this is an example of Title I, Part A. So for requested documentation 1, you would need a copy of the 2324 written LEA PFE policy. So you would then, based on your documentation file that you're submitting, you would include the page numbers where we can find that policy. So if that's the first page of your submission, then you would, if it's a 3-page policy, you put 1 through 3. Then the next requested documentation are meeting agenda, meeting minutes or notes, and sign-in sheets. So you could see what it says there. And then you would reference, okay, this starts on page 4 and it goes through page 7. Then you look at the following documentation. And so this is the campus policy for the campus selected. And so again, if the campus policy is on pages 8 and 9, then you type in 8, 9. Then the last piece of documentation is the PFE campus policy meeting agenda, meeting notes. And so for that, say you'll find that on pages 10 through 12. So once you complete all those, then you move on to the next part of this details data form. And in this part of the form, we're going to ask you to provide your LEA program contact name, the email address, and the contact phone number for the person that has the most knowledge about this documentation submission. There's also a place for LEA comments. If you want to provide any additional information, it's optional. So you can provide additional information that the reviewer may find helpful while conducting the review. And the other thing I'm going to note is you could see there's a red asterisk here by these columns or by these titles or of requested information. That means that it's a required field. So if you look down here in the bottom right-hand corner where you have a save button and it's gray, the reason it's gray is because there's required fields that have not been completed. So once I complete all the required fields, so the program contact name, the email, and a phone number, you could see that the button becomes available as blue, that you can now save the information. The last thing that you're going to need to select is you're going to need to change the submission status, your LEA submission status, because as I mentioned, everyone's is defaulting to submission pending, not started. To do that, you click on the drop-down list. You can select in process. So if you don't say you don't have all the documentation after you look at this and you decided, oops, we left out a piece of documentation, but I already put some page numbers, you can select in process and save it. Just remember to come back when you're gonna revise any of what you already included to select submission complete. Once you select submission complete, data entered, and documentation attached, you would click save. Now, you're not done at that point because then you need to upload the documentation. However, when you click save, we've added a feature that you will get an auto-generated email confirming that your data that you provided here has been saved, and you'll receive what you provided here in an auto-generated email. So that has been added as an additional feature here. So to get the information to be saved and submitted, you would click save. You'll get a data saved check mark. You'll see the check mark appear up here on the left as well. Then it disappears, but you don't see the save on the taskbar at the bottom anymore. So that information's been saved. Then the next step is uploading your documentation. So if you click on attachments, you have the option to attach a file. So you click on attach a file, then it's going to open your document browser on your computer. You select the appropriate documentation, and then there's a button for you to attach it. So you click attach file. I found a document. It uploaded that document here. It's going to date and timestamp it of when it was uploaded. And you could see that the attachment is there. So it'll show the attachment. Then you can close out and go to your next one. Again, this is for Title I, Part C. You'll include the page numbers. Also note that the number of requested documentation is different for each program. So for the one we just did, there was 4. For this one, for migrant, there's 4. If we go to Title II, Part A, this one only has, this one has 4. So 4 must be the popular number. Let's see what PMP has. PMP only has 3 here. So again, that's how you would complete your data form, and you would attach your documentation for review. So again, that's how the work app works for each program. And then you can come back and look at what you submitted. You can add additional attachments. And so one thing I'm going to mention is another feature is that once you select submission complete, it's possible that all your submission information is going to be grayed out as read-only. But if you change your status back to in process and save it, then it will open up those fields again for you to be able to input data. On the attachments, if you inadvertently upload an attachment that that is incorrect or that is not relevant to our review, you can send us an email to essa support@tea.texas.gov, and that's on our contact list. And we can remove the attachment for you if it's not relevant for the review. So that's an option. All right, so I'm going to look at the questions to see if there are any work app related questions that I need to look at on the screen, and then we can move on. So I answered about not having access to the work app yet. There's a question, is it one PDF file per program? Yes, so it is one PDF file per program. And again, you would upload them on different lines and different attachment forms here. If needed to split the file and upload multiple files, should the page numbers on the second file continue from the first file or start over with page 1? I would suggest that that the page numbers would continue on the second file. Are districts of innovation allowed to use their district innovation plan in place of a district improvement plan? I'm not sure that I can provide guidance on that other than if you're, for example, for Title I Part A, there's certain requirements for the Title I Part A LEA program plan. Those are usually in a district improvement plan. If those requirements are now in your district of innovation plan, then that's what you would submit, if that's possible. But if not, you're not waived from having a plan for your Title I Part A program or any other programs that require a plan. There's a question, what if we capture the requirement through an addendum to the district improvement plan? Of course, we would send the addendum. What would we submit to show we consider the addendum part of the plan without sending the entire plan? So again, an addendum is completely acceptable. So your requirements for each program don't specifically have to be in the district improvement plan per se, as long as they're in the plan. And so if you submit the addendum to the plan, that's fine. Again, as long as you have school years on that addendum to the plan. I already talked about the LEA program plan. Again, that's a program specific requirement. So if you can email Vivian Smurl or ESSA support about the LEA program plan question. If selected and you begin the validation form, will you save your work? That's a good question. The only way it will save your work is if you have something in each of the fields that are required. So if you start and you say, oops, I don't have this documentation, but I want to save what I started on, you can just put need to update, type something in there, save it so that it can save. And of course, you can select in process, save it, and then you'll know that you need to come back and add whatever you need to. But it won't save unless each required field has something in it. We're only submitting applicable pages. That is correct. So you would only list those page numbers on the in the work app. And again, if your district improvement plan already has page numbers, to avoid the confusion, you want to number your documentation based on the actual file that you're submitting. So you can put a line through the actual page number from your district improvement plan, and instead on the right-hand corner, just label each page of the documentation based on what you're submitting. So for example, if your district improvement plan you're submitting, there's 3 pages, and then there's additional documentation, you would label it page 1, 2, and 3, regardless of what the page numbers of that district improvement plan are. We had a random validation in 23-24 for rural low-income schools, will still be in the pool. So no, if you participated in a FPC, Federal Program Compliance Division validation in the prior year, for any program, you won't be selected for this year. If the in process is chosen, the LEA can click save and come back to finish. That is correct. If you click the save button and need to change the data, can you go back and save after the button disappears? Yes. But again, what I mentioned is you're going to need to change the status to in process, save it, and then it'll open up the submission again. Once you've selected submission complete, it is going to lock everything that you submitted. If our LEA is not selected this year, can we get the text you showed in work apps that shows the specific details needed for each requirement? So yes, all the resources are going to be available online, and I'll go through that in the next portion of this training. Okay, so that's all the questions for now. Let's go back to the presentation. All right, so again, in the presentation, you have screenshots of what we just looked at in the work app system. So I'm going to fast forward to the next slide that shows that we've gone over already the different steps for preparing documents and uploading your documents. So now we're going to get to the resources. So there's multiple resources available. There's going to be a process handbook that's just generic information about the whole process. You're going to have instructions for submitting documentation in the form of a training video and training slides. We are going to be posting soon a Navigating the Smartsheet Work App System video. But again, you'll have the one with the screenshots available if that particular video is not available by November 13th. And then program-specific resources include guidance documents for each program and requirement, training videos and training slides for each program and requirement. All the resources are going to be posted on the webpage that Vivian Smurl placed the link in the chat. What I'm going to say is during our training this morning, our communications team approved our updated website. So the web page is actually already live. There are a couple of things that aren't there, like the video from today, a video on the instructions. But for the most part, I'll show you in a minute what that web page looks like. So let me go ahead and stop sharing since it is live now, and share the actual website that you can take a look at. So the website is live, as I mentioned. And so this is what the website looks like. It has the 6 programs that we're looking at this year. There's a section on general resources. And of course, it says coming soon, the things that are not available yet. But we have the documentation submission instructions, training slides. Here's where you'll be able to locate the LEAs that have been selected to participate. That'll be posted by 11/14. The process handbook will be posted by the 12th. Then the statewide training video for today's training will be posted here. The slides have already been posted. Those are the ones we've been sharing. And then down here are all the program requirement specific resources. So for every requirement, we have a guidance document, training slides, and a training video that's available. So you can already access all these resources. And so again, it's for every requirement that we're looking at. There's a guidance document, training slides, and a training video. So that's what it looks like for all the programs. There's actually 21 resources or 21 guidance documents, 21 sets of training slides, and 21 training videos. So I have to give kudos to my staff for producing all these resources to assist you in navigating this process as best you can. And again, ensuring that we're providing the best customer service experience as you participate in this process with us. So again, that's the webpage. For contact information, I did talk about our program contacts. You can click on this link and it'll take you to our program contacts in case you have program specific questions. Let me open one of the resources so you can kind of see a guidance document. Let's do Title 4, Part A, consultation. So again, this is what it looks like. Every guidance document will look like this. But it's customized by the program and the requirements. So you could see the documentation that's being requested. And then there's instructions for assembling documentation that I already went over. And then the resources are available here as well. So, and then there's contact information. So this is what the guidance documents look like. So now let me go back to the presentation. So again, these are screenshots of what each of the documents look like. The process handbook is just going to have general information. It's not program specific. And then it'll have a table of contents and you'll have all this information. In the handbook, there'll also be links to all the resources. So aside from the web page, the handbook will also have the video links, the training slides, and the guidance documents for every program and requirement. Again, this is important. The documentation requested section is very important. That's where it shows what you're going to be required to submit. So again, you'll have the selected documentation required to be submitted, the year of documentation, which will be 23-24 for all, and then a description of the acceptable documentation. At the very last page of the document, there's a requirement reference section. So again, this is where we reference where in the ESSA statute this requirement is, where in the ESSA program-specific provisions and assurances you can find the information, and where in the compliance report we have that self-check item. As always, we do provide grant funding to our education service centers to support LEAs and provide technical assistance and training. Please reach out to them if you need additional support or technical assistance related to the process. And regional ESE program contacts will be contacting LEAs within 48 hours of notification of selection to offer technical assistance as part of this process. So let me see if there's still some questions, some more questions. There's some kudos. We appreciate the kudos. Since there are multiple requirements for each title, will all LEAs selected be submitting the same requirement this year? So again, every LEA is possibly would have a different item that they're required to submit documentation for. And that'll be the LEA will find that particular requirement noted in the notification letter. So, for example, in Title I, Part A, we are looking at 5 requirements statewide. So some LEAs are going to be picked for campus allocations. Some are going to be picked for the PFE policies. So it's a variety of requirements across the state, but each requirement is each LEA is only required to submit documentation for one requirement. Will we provide links to the website and guidance document? Yes, those links I think have already been provided in the chat. They're in the chat. Yeah, and one thing I want to mention, if you try to go, since we just updated the page, all the references to this program monitoring page, if you try to get a link to them from our program pages or our main page, it's not going to be accessible just yet. We have to go and update those links manually. And since the web page just published today, that still needs to be done. So for now, you're going to get web page not found if you click off of any of our pages. But if you click on the link that's been provided in the chat, that one should take you to the appropriate page. Okay, so let's move on. We're almost at the end of the session. So to recap, kind of what's next is our resources should be posted by the 12th, which we worked really diligently to already get them posted. So they actually, most of them are already available today. November 13th, LEAs will receive email notification of selection via an auto-generated email from our work app system. And then by November 14th, we'll be posting the list of all LEAs selected to participate. November 13th through the December 13th, you'll be offered or provided with technical assistance from your education service centers. And then December 13th will be the due date for you to submit your documentation for TEA review. So I'm going to look to see if there are any other questions. There's questions about the certificate. I believe Jamie Goodwin has posted updated links to those forms for the certificate. But I think that's all we have. So thank you for all you do for the students and families you serve every day. You truly make a difference. And again, we do what we do because we have to monitor that the requirements are benefiting those that they're intended to require, right? And so it's part of a continuous improvement process. We don't want for this process to seem punitive or a gotcha approach. Again, we're trying to ensure that program implementation is occurring with fidelity and that LEAs have that evidence to show compliance with all the multiple requirements. So the last thing before we say goodbye is if you could please provide us with feedback on today's training. Your feedback is definitely important. We do look at it, we consider it, it's part of our performance metrics. And so we value your feedback. So please complete the presentation feedback form for today's training. Let us know how we can do better or improve, or things that you like that we're doing that we would continue. And we appreciate everything you do, and we'll appreciate the feedback that you provide. Again, our contacts, you can reach out to us if you have any questions. Our division contact is at the top left-hand corner, ssa support@tea.texas.gov. You can always email us there. There's somebody that's checking that inbox on a daily basis. So if somebody's out of the office, you may want to email ESSA support to see if we can provide you with a quicker response if we are able to during that time period. So again, thank you for everything you do. We hope you have a great Friday and a nice weekend. If you have a long weekend, enjoy it. And thank you to all our veterans that have served and continue to serve for our nation. So have a good Veterans Day. Thank you all, everyone. Have a great day.